Hi everyone, my name is Doron Berenhottz, and this is my last semester at Queensborough. I wanted to start off by saying thank you to Marissa for furthering my knowledge on the Holocaust. Although I went to Poland and I am Jewish, I still learned a lot from the sessions we had throughout the semester. I was very happy to hear that they are offering such an internship on campus. It is great to raise awareness and teach young students of the events that occurred in Europe not so long ago. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of anti-Semitism all over the world, and by having the survivors share their stories, it allows us to learn and hopefully prevent having these kinds of events from occurring again. And since we're already talking about the Holocaust, and that's why we're here, just last week, I don't know if you heard, but on the news there was a cab driver driving around with a armband, a swastika armband. So it's good we're talking about it, raising awareness and letting people know that it did happen and people who are trying to deny it. So that's that. I also wanted to thank Sam Widowski for making the time, allowing me to interview him, and giving me the opportunity to hear his touching story. Like Marissa said, unfortunately he's not here because of Shavuot, which is a Jewish holiday. So it was very tough for me to go and interview him. But before I started interviewing Sam, I didn't know how I'd be able to ask him about his experience in Auschwitz. But I knew this might be the only chance I ever have to speak to a survivor face-to-face that got sent to a death camp and saw his family get sent to die right in front of his very own eyes. I can't even picture myself being in such a situation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sam and the life he had growing up in Poland and the different camps he was sent to. So Sam's real name is Shmuel. In English it's Sam Widowski. He was born in 1925 in Skutskowola, and that's a small town in Poland. And from there he moved to a bigger city called Lodz. He had a mother, her name was Bella, and his father died when he was 2.5 years old. So already from then they already had like a tough life, being a single parent with having 7 siblings as well. They lived in a Jewish community, and most of his friends were Jewish, and they kept kosher, and did all the Jewish traditions, as well as getting sent to yeshiva, which is a Jewish school. He spent most of their weekends hanging out, with the family, spending a lot of time together. He did have other family members in Poland, but because of communication and travel situations, it was hard for them to really stay in touch so much. But an event that really stuck out to him that he kept on repeating over and over again was on September 1st, Friday morning, 1939. I quote, "I will never forget. The Germans started to occupy Poland. There were air raids and bombings. He had to go into shelters and wait for clearance. And that's when the Germans were attacking, and he had to go into hiding. Right away, he felt like the war was against the Jews. And again, there were several things that he repeated over and over again that you knew that it really stuck to him. He also couldn't go, Jews couldn't go to school anymore. They couldn't buy shoes, and it was a complete turnaround from day to night. And over the time, he felt like it was systematically worse, just getting worse and worse. The mood in the neighborhood got very bad. There were long lines for food, and German soldiers were roaming the streets. He right away realized at that point that the situation was escalating and getting bad. And luckily, his brother realized that in advance, and he didn't want to go into hiding. So he was, I guess you could say, smart enough to flee to Russia. And he was able to survive, his brother. After that, they started taking all the Jews and putting them in ghettos. They organized them in the town of Lodz, and he lived there from 1940 to 1944. They put him in an area in the poor section over there, and over there, the Jews basically, he was telling me, they ran the place. They had their own police force, firefighters, and people had jobs, and obviously they didn't get paid, and the conditions were very tough over there. Although the jobs were very tough, he actually enjoyed what he did because he said it was considered a good job. He dealt with distributing clothes in the clothing distribution. So that was good because it kept him busy. And a lot of people didn't even have jobs, and they were they just were kind of losing their mind, just having nothing to do, going from like a normal life to doing nothing and being isolated in a very condensed small area. At the age of 19, Sam was moved to Auschwitz. At first, they told him they were taking them to work in a different place. He said the train ride lasted all night, and they were all scared because they had no idea what was going on. He said it was like being blindfolded. When they got off the train, they were told to leave their items behind. They were shouting at them, and they were petrified. It was like I said, being blindfolded. He saw Eichmann was standing directly in front of them, telling people to go to the left and right. And the left meant death, which meaning they were going to die in the crematoriums. Sam and his brother-in-law were the only ones that survived. The rest of his family got sent to the crematoriums, besides his brother, who was able to flee before. And at that point, when Sam was telling me this, he kind of like broke down in a way, and it was very hard for him to continue telling me the story. Even though it happened like so long ago, I felt like it was tough for him. And he told me his nephews and nieces made a DVD. They interviewed him. And from that point on, I didn't want to push it because I know it's a very sensitive topic, especially, my grandma is also a survivor. So even when I ask her questions, it's kind of tough. So he gave me a DVD, and the rest of the questions and things that I tried to absorb as much as I could from the DVD that I watched. But a little bit more about Auschwitz that he told me. His whole family and his brother got sent to the right, pretty much. And then that first day they got there, they all left them in the hot sun without water, no food. He said having no water was worse than having no food because the sun was just beaming down on them and they were just left in the field. Then they split them up into their bunk beds, into their dorms where they would be sleeping. There was about 1,000 people in one dorm, and they all had to fight for a small section. That's where him and his brother-in-law joined another 4 people, and it became the 6 of them as like a little team that they stuck together. The food was scarce though, and he was telling me how they got one bowl for 6 people with 1 spoon and 1 cup for food. And basically that's where we stopped talking about Auschwitz because it was just tough for him. After Auschwitz, this is from the DVD, after spending 3 weeks in Auschwitz, he got sent on a 6-day train journey to Germany that he worked for a farmer. Sam says this was the best camp he could have got sent to because the labor wasn't so hard. After he was working on the farm for a few weeks, he got sent to work somewhere else. They sent him to work in a different camp, which was to unload cement. Right away when he got there, he knew that if he stayed there, he was not going to survive. So Sam's a smart guy. He made believe like he was sick, and they sent him back to a different camp where the conditions were better. After the war, Sam got married at the age of 22, and he met his wife through his brother-in-law. Even though his sister's husband was with them through the whole time, luckily they were able to stay together, and he met his wife through his brother-in-law. He moved to the Bronx, and he said life from moving from Europe to America was not easy because he had no family support and he had no money as well. I asked him why didn't he move to Israel, and he said it wasn't the best time to move to Israel because they were going through independence in 1948 and it still wasn't established. One other thing I want to say, being a part of this internship contributed so much to my knowledge on the Holocaust. Even though I am Jewish, there are a lot of things that I learned throughout our sessions. When I originally signed up for this internship, I thought I would just learn more information about the horrific events and continue on with my day. But more than ever, it really affected me even after I walked out of the Kupferberg building. It really got to me thinking about my grandmother who managed to flee Poland on her own at the age of 14 and survive. My grandfather did the same, but I was very young, so I don't really recall his stories. And one of the stories I do remember that I heard from my parents is, as he was explaining about the Holocaust in his family, he wanted to take his little sister with him to Russia, and his parents said she's too young. And the second he said that, my dad told me he turned pale white and he just fainted. And ever since then, he didn't talk about it. So it's good that we have survivors who are strong. Not saying that my grandfather wasn't strong, but it's very good and courageous that you guys are willing to speak and go on and tell us the stories. Ever since I started learning about the Holocaust again, I try to keep in touch with my grandmother more often, who currently lives in Israel. Besides that, I also try to raise awareness about the events that occurred not long ago. It is extremely important to keep learning about the Holocaust, especially with the amount of anti-Semitism going on in the world. The part that touched me the most was the book we had to read, named Frederick, which is a book, has a bunch of short stories about a kid named Frederick, how he had a normal life, and then gradually how it escalated and got so much worse. And when I was reading it, it was hard for me to read it all at once, because it was just like so devastating to hear and like try to put myself in that situation. So one other thing. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Elie Wiesel talk in the 92nd Street Y, and he touched on the topic of anti-Semitism. Just like Elie said, I also never understood why people hate the Jews. Elie said something along the lines, they hate us because we are successful, but they also hate us because we are poor. There isn't a solid reason why someone can or should hate a whole race. That was my conclusion of my interviewing Sam, and I really enjoyed doing this. And one other thing I want to say, I admire all you survivors, for being strong enough, and some of you were on the kinder transport, some of you did manage to flee, and because of you, I am here, and the Jewish people have a country, and I really admire all of you for being strong enough to, survive. And thank you very much.